Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 107th level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turford. I am joined, as always, by the level 99 elf medic, Dr. Garret Bland. How's it going, Garret?
I'm doing good, man. You know, I'm just letting you know, I didn't level up. No, not yet. But I did gain an ability. I gained a skill or a perk,
Oh,
as you said. It's called spontaneous combustion, making
excellent.
making all the bodies hot everywhere within my area. So there you go.
Excellent.
Uh,
I mean, we're just self-evolving right now,
we're
Garret. That's what's happening.
self-evolving.
Our
Yeah,
cells, they're just constantly changing. The world may
evolution,
have
man.
spontaneously combusted, Garret, but we have
You
not.
know how scary, like close the concept of that is to my work on a day-to-day basis because I do kind of research and discovery of drugs, but we don't have to get into all that
We'll probably
just
get into it a little bit when we
yet. A
talk
little bit.
about some of the
Yes.
themes of a certain game, Garret, because we have been kind of teeing this up. I have been wanting to do this episode we're going to record tonight
For a long time.
since we started this show, Garret. I've wanted to find, whether it was making Garret play this game or finding someone else to come on the show who's played this game, because I don't really know anyone else in real life, Garret, who's played Parasite Eve until now,
Really?
because
Oh,
you've
wow.
played Parasite Eve. I mean, a couple people I'm starting to learn who have come into our community since we started doing the show have
Mhm.
played Parasite Eve before. But
That's
like
good.
when we first started doing the show, Garret, like I didn't know anyone else besides my older brother Kyle and his friend Jay, who like he would go over to his friend's house to play the game. But
Mhm.
like neither one of them remember anything about Parasite Eve at this point. So like that, I just again had no one else. So I'm so glad
Mm,
we can finally
got it.
cobble this episode together, because I have been chomping at the bit. Let me tell you what to talk about tonight's topic. But that is when we get to the reading from the sacred text segment.
Of course.
We're not there yet, folks,
Not
because
there yet.
we should probably, clear the dungeon of those pesky mobs, because we want to get to that raid boss as quickly as possible. So folks at home, if you want to support the show, there's a number of awesome ways to do that. Number one, if you're watching the live stream right now over at youtube.com/carpoolgaming, first of all, hit that like button, smash kick that subscribe button if you haven't hit that subscribe button already, and then let us know in the comments below if you've played Parasite Eve and what you think about it. Or, if you don't like Parasite Eve, or if you don't like horror games, that's totally cool. Just let us know in the comments below what's something that you like, or just whatever you feel like talking about in the comments of our shows. Also, if you're listening on audio feeds, don't forget to subscribe to us, and also rate us if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Also, if you want one big podcast feed with the entire Carpool Gaming cinematic universe on it, you can head on over to our patreon.com/carpool gaming, throw a little tip in the old tip jar, and out comes content. But Garret, I have another thing to add here. Extra Life is coming up soon, my friend. A month and a half away. Carpool Gaming will be converging on Rome, New York, as we will be, of course, doing our yearly live stream. We will actually have all the information about Extra Life coming up pretty soon. Of course, it's all run by the incredible Lee Navarro, the fearless leader of the Fetus Overdrive Extra Life team. We're just finalizing everything, including, hotels and dates and stuff like that. But we should have all that information to y'all pretty soon. So please be excited. Extra Life is happening very, very soon. We've got some amazing prizes we're going to be giving away, like this one right here. So make sure to, of course, tune in for that information. Other than that, Garret, it is time, without further ado. I'm so excited. It's time to read from the sacred texts, because we're finally going to do a single game. We haven't done one of these episodes in a while, Garret, where we focus,
That's true,
like put the microscope on a specific series. And I'm so happy we're finally able to get back to this. Of course, the story about how this all came about is that Garret, throughout this year, we've been doing Garret's Backlog Adventure, where Garret has wanted me to recommend him old games to play. And of course, me being Ryan Turford, I had to eventually recommend Parasite Eve on the PlayStation 1 for Garret to play. It was meant to be. I've been talking about this game and this series on the show for years and years and years, but we've never really done like a deep dive on Parasite Eve, and I wanted to wait till Garret's played it first. But now you have, Garret, which is exciting. Yeah. So we're going to, of course, dive into the series as a whole. Of course, you've only played the first game, which is
Yes.
the most important one to play.
Okay.
But we'll talk a little bit about the second and third one. Talk about where the series can go from here, and of course, we'll do a deep dive on the first one and talk about your experience and whatnot. Of course, lots of listener inquiries tonight. So,
yeah.
First of all, thank you to everyone who wrote in. Second, people have things to say about this game, Garrett, and I'm interested.
I wonder why.
What people have to say about it. But first, as always, when we do one of these series deep dives, it's time for some fun facts, Garrett. We're starting the show.
Let's do it.
We're returning to fun facts. We haven't. I feel like we haven't done fun facts in like 3 months, Garrett. So
I'm before your break for sure. I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like I'm excited to bring back the fun facts, and of course, I came
so much fun.
I went all out with Parasite Eve tonight.
Of course you did.
First off, Parasite Eve was originally launched on the PlayStation 1 in Japan on March 29th, 1998, with the game launching in North America on September 9th the same year. In fact, Garrett, that makes this game 25 years old, which is crazy to think about. This year, it's 25 years old. This year, the 25th anniversary
almost my age.
of Parasite Eve. Yeah,
almost.
Exactly. It's like, more than half my age, Garrett, which is
it's drinking age for sure. It's like it's an adult. It's like has a job right now.
It's like going out and going all these frat parties with its friends and attending college, maybe going for its PhD at this
Went through life.
This is a smart game, Garrett. Okay, Parasite Eve is a smart game, so it's probably going for its PhD, and that's why it's still in school.
For sure.
Parasite Eve is, of course, and maybe people don't know this, it's actually a licensed game. It's not actually an original idea. It is a licensed game based off a 1995 novel by the same name that was written by Hideki Senna. There was even a film adaptation of the original novel released in 1997. So a year before the game came out, there was actually a film based off the first novel. And then the game came out. And then there was also a manga series in Japan that was based around both the book and the game. So they did 2 different manga series, which is interesting. I haven't read those. And I haven't actually read the book either.
Are they Japanese only, or do they
Japanese
have
only?
Yeah, I bet
there is a North American translation of the book that came out in 2001, but it is very expensive because they did not make a lot of copies of it. So I think it's probably floating out in PDF form on the internet somewhere.
I'm sure,
but we're getting there. Now, the game itself was directed by Takahashi Tokiga, who might sound a little bit familiar to listeners of this show because he was the director of Live Alive and was also the scenario director for Chrono Trigger. He was basically one of the Fab 3 directors on Chrono Trigger. The game itself
makes sense.
Yeah. The game was also produced by Sakaguchi-san, who, of course, we talked about on the Mistwalker episode. He was the creator of the Final Fantasy series. And as you'll find out through the fun facts, he actually was pretty involved with the development of Parasite Eve, because we talked about this on the Mistwalker episode, Garrett, where Sakaguchi-san, he got thrown into the producer role on a lot of projects, but he didn't really do anything with a lot of Squaresoft games. But this one in particular, he actually had a lot of involvement with. Which is pretty cool. So him and Takashi-san, like them coming together is like a really cool partnership because they are responsible for some of Squaresoft's best games, which is pretty cool.
Is it like one of the only games that they work on it together heavily? Participate in? Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Because for the most part then, after this game, Totika-san worked on Parasite Eve 2, and then he started to work more on a lot of portable games. So the Final Fantasy 4 port for the DS, as well as a bunch of different like portable iterations of Squaresoft's games. So that was what he was kind of known for after Parasite Eve.
Got it.
But the main reason why Square wanted to actually, go into the horror genre was because just around this time, if folks don't remember, this was around the time that Scream came out in North America, but also we were seeing a lot of, Japanese horror movies really make a big resurgence around this time. Like horror as a genre was like kind of dead in kind of the early 90s. It was really played out both in North America and Japan, but it really kind of had this like resurgence in the mid to late 90s. So that's why Square wanted to get, dive into the horror genre. They wanted to get their own game. They saw what Capcom was doing over there with Resident Evil, and they kind of wanted to get in with themselves because they saw it being like a big, popular thing coming out. So the game itself was meant to serve as like a sequel to the original novel, and Aya Brea was a character actually created by Square. So the original author didn't create Aya.
Okay.
It was actually the character was actually created by Sakaguchi-san, but her ultimate design was actually done by a very young Tetsuya Nomura before he actually went on to do Kingdom Hearts and all the Final Fantasy games, and like pretty much he's had his hand in pretty much everything Square related ever since, Final Fantasy 12 came out. So, yeah, it's pretty cool because that was back just when Nomura-san was like a character creator or like a character artist essentially. So, it's cool that he actually designed the character of Aya. And in fact, Aya was actually then brought into kind of like the sequels to the novels, essentially, where the artist liked the novelist liked the character of Aya so much from the game that they actually wanted to bring Aya into the novel world. So when they wrote like spin-off novels and things like that, like they centered around Aya as a main character, which was really cool.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool.
So the game was originally supposed to be set in Japan 6 months after the events of the novel ending, but with a large portion of the staff working in the United States, because essentially like the development of this game was about 50-50 with Square Japan and then Square like Honolulu, where Sakaguchi-san was working.
Oh, right. Mistwalker. And
that. Yeah, like like they had that Hawaii studio that Sakaguchi-san was running. So that's what actually made them decide to actually switch the game's location to the United States. And Sakaguchi-san was the one who proposed New York specifically, which is interesting because, again, we don't really have a lot of Square games that take place in the real world, let alone New York City. Or the United States in general. So it was just like, again, really refreshing and cool for Square Enix. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the novel's writer Sena-san stated that they were actually very impressed after playing the game with how the game developers really translated their novel into a video game. And as I mentioned, they were inspired to use Aya for further sequels to the original novel. This game, though, Garrett, sold pretty well when it came out. It was actually like a big-ish deal when it came out. Not as big as something like Final Fantasy VII was, but it was actually a fairly big deal. It sold really well, which, instantly had them greenlight a sequel. So Parasite Eve 2 actually launched 2 years later in Japan on December 16th, 1999, but it also came to North America on September 12th, 2000, which kind of hurt the sales a little bit of that game, Garrett, because it came out around the time the PlayStation 2 was coming out, which... Yeah, because
dying product.
Yeah, the 2000s, like 2000 was just very, very, very tail end of PlayStation 1 generation, because PlayStation 2 came out the following year. So just people were ready or sorry, not the following year. Sorry, it came out in 2000. So actually, people were already jumping ship to PlayStation 2 games. So it was tough for games to sell back then on PlayStation 1. And then, of course, there was a follow-up, a third game in the series, a spin-off game, The Third Birthday, which launched in Japan on December 22nd, 2010, with the game hitting North American PSPs on March 29th, 2011, which oddly enough was originally supposed to be a 5-part mobile game. But then they decided, you know what? We're just going to turn this into a PSP game instead, because that always goes over well. We'll talk about that when we get to The Third Birthday. And then last fun fact that I had, Square Enix has confirmed, because, people talk about the series, when they talk about, they're like, oh, it didn't really sell well, and that's why people, why we haven't really gotten a new game. But Square Enix confirmed that the first 2 games in the series had shipped over 3 million copies before The Third Birthday had released in 2010. So it was actually, like, I think the first game had most of those sales. I think it was, about 2 million for the first game, 1 million for the second game. But that's pretty good for a niche genre like this one.
It's pretty good
with the game we're about to talk about, and especially too because like the North American presence wasn't super heavy for this game. It was a lot of the sales in this were for Japan, which you're just working with far less people than the North American market. But
I find it interesting that the Japanese audience was really into it, maybe because of the novel part of it, like it's something tangible for them. Like they know the book, they know the IP for it, but the setting of this first game is definitely not Japan.
no, but I mean, there's also, a lot of Japan is actually, influenced or idolizes American culture in a way. So I think that plays into it a little bit, because you actually saw a lot of Japanese games, especially in the early 90s, really being based in America. I mean, it's one of the main reasons why Metal Gear Solid, as an example, was meant it was based in the United States. Because even though you're right, it's not based in their home country of Japan, like a lot of people like that, but also too, it's something I talked about a little bit earlier. Horror was really on the upswing when this game came out in Japan specifically. Like that's when we were starting to get movies like Ringu and Junon and stuff like that. Like when a lot of those horror movies that, then got American sequels, American, remakes like The Ring and The Grudge were starting to come around. Like those were all coming out around the same time that this game came out. So yeah, that makes sense. Cause also it's one of the main reasons why too Resident Evil, sold really well on the PlayStation 1 as well. It was just horror was in Japan at the time.
So, got it. Cool.
There you go. Those are all the fun facts I have. Of course, we'll dive deeper on, of course, Parasite Eve 2 and 3. We'll get to them a little bit later. But before I get to the first note that you see on this document, Garrett, I'm going to bring in Sean Capri, who asks this question. Because I've of course been recommending this game for a long time to people. And I'm really curious to know from your perspective, your thought process on this question. So Sean asks, question for Garrett. How do you approach a game like Parasite Eve, which has been hyped up for literal years by Ryan Turford? Does it create impossible expectations when someone say, you got to try this game, it's the best game ever, OMG? Garrett, I want to know, because again, I've been hyping up this game for a long time, and I really hope that hasn't really, set unfair expectations for this game. But obviously this leads into my first thing. I want to know kind of your thoughts playing the first Parasite Eve in 2023 nowadays. I'm curious to know your thoughts on it, man.
Well, first off, when you assigned me this game, I was not surprised at all. I kind of predicted this would be like the next game. I actually, pushed Ryan to like, hey, give me a PS1 RPG, because I really haven't played any PS1 RPGs much at all. Or I played some, but I haven't beaten any. So this was a good start. As far as I know, Ryan is, hyped this up a lot throughout the years. Yeah. But I think I kept my expectations in check just because I just haven't heard anyone else tell me this game's amazing. I have heard of it, but no one has told me, oh, this is the best game ever. You were the only one that told me.
And this, of course, is coming from the person whose favorite Zelda game is Zelda 2, which is also just like, that's a red flag already as to trusting my opinions about games.
And you play Final Fantasy 14. I'm just like, I don't know. Like it could be in the noise. So
that's something I forgot to mention in Cleaning the Garage. Thank you for reminding me, Garrett. We, as the Carpool Gaming Free Company in Final Fantasy 14 this week, hit the goal of being able to buy our own house. The Carpool Gaming house in Final Fantasy 14 is going to be a thing. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be looking at plots this week, and I'm going to be signing the deed, and we are going to have our own house in Final Fantasy 14. The Carpool Gaming Lounge.
So do you guys live with each other? Like, how does this
go? We'll be able to have like rooms that everyone's going to be able to have in the house. There'll also probably be a submarine and a chocobo stable and an airship. So, it's going to be a lot of good things. A lot of good things. Maybe a disco pole and a stripper pole. Maybe who knows? All kinds of weird stuff, man. Final Fantasy 14 is a weird game, okay? I can't help it.
Yes, I shouldn't have said anything about that, but okay.
Anyways, continue.
Parasite Eve. Well, first off, how do I play this game? There's many, I don't have a PS1. It's available on PS3 and PS Vita through the PSP. Like it's in the classic store, so you can buy it off there. I think that's probably the most accessible way to play this game. So I did choose the Vita. I could have emulated on my Steam Deck, but the settings weren't quite right, and I didn't know how to make it right. I can upscale it, but the 2D background art was still like choppy. Like it ran.
The emulation's really weird on this game in particular.
So I decided to just put it on Vita, and just ran with it. But yeah, okay. So going through this game, my expectations were just like, okay, Ryan really likes this game. It's a PS1 RPG. Understand that I've played Final Fantasy VII Classic a little bit, a chunk of it. I understand what's supposed to look like it's a 3D object-oriented graphics with a drop-off 2D art in the background. I understand that. So just get all those like passings behind me. Let's go through this game. And so I did. And overall, man, I really enjoyed my experience. There's a reason kind of why I blazed through it last week. Because I told you after the show last week, I was like, oh, I'm a little bit deeper in, but I'm not like, I was kind of like playing other things too. And then
I also knew I knew a key was you were telling me where you were in the game. I was like, oh, it's about to get really, really good. And I feel like it was gonna probably suck you in from that point, I think.
Yeah. So the next day I felt like, okay, I just got to get through this. So I went through it this past week, probably like every day I played throughout that game. Finished it 10 hours, so it's not too long. I did have to need some help on certain parts, especially because there's no maps in this game, which is it's an early game, so
a lot of PS1 games were like this. So
yeah.
Because even a game like Final Fantasy VII, because even though Final Fantasy VII has like an overworld mini map, a lot of times it's just not helpful at all. Like there are games on PS1 that either have very unhelpful maps or just no maps at all. Like that was just an error, like an error kind of thing. Which also like a lot of times when I usually recommend people to play games of this caliber or of this age, like I usually always recommend people to always try and find like a spoiler free guide. So then that way it's a lot easier to find your way around.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And also so let me just go through kind of the basics of this game. So it is I wouldn't say survival horror, but it is a role-playing game with this horror. It's a horror genre, horror elements. You play as Aya, the female agent that's in New York City, and then you're going after this villain called Eve. And Eve basically just destroys the whole New York City, which I was quite surprised how much she just trashed New York City. And as I understand it, this was before 9/11, so I totally understand that now.
Yeah.
They couldn't make this game after 9/11, let me tell you.
Not in New York City. They could make it in another location, but probably not New York City.
Probably not New York City. It's kind of insane. But yeah, and then so you go throughout the map, and there's points of interest. Of course, there's like a national, I think a history museum.
You go to the National History Museum. You go to Central Park.
You got a hospital. You got the theater. Like various points of interest all around New York City. And then you're basically controlling Aya and going through various maps, and then you encounter monsters. And then when you encounter a set of monsters, they're make-believe creatures, horror creatures or whatever, you are in combat. And so the combat, I actually related a lot to this. It's very close to Transistor, actually, where you kind of just have a gauge that's like active, and then once you hit that, once it's filled up, then you can use your actions. So you can shoot, you can heal, you have a bunch of different skills you can do, so on and so forth. And then of course, just run them down on the HP until they're dead. The monsters can attack back. You have an opportunity to just move around and dodge their attacks if you can. Sometimes you just can't, and you have to figure it out. So yeah, I really liked the gameplay of this. It was pretty addictive.
That was also one of the reasons why I actually recommended it to you, Garrett, in particular, because I knew you liked Transistor, and the combat was I knew it was similar to how Transistor's combat worked. Which I knew, so I knew it was going to be right up your alley.
Yeah, Transistor has set number of moves, so it's probably another layer deeper, but it's essentially the same combat where you just pause. Okay, you take an action, whatever action you want to do. There are boss fights that are pretty cool throughout this game. They definitely put me on edge, like trying to figure out what to do at various points.
Or you just got to watch out for running out of bullets. Like that's an actual factual thing. Like that's where the even though you're right, it's not like a traditional survival horror game. Like it brings in those survival horror elements, like low ammunition or things like that, like the things that you would find, like limited resources that you'd find in survival horror games.
That's true. And then so yeah, after like an end of a battle, you can get ammo, you can get medicine, and so on and so forth. I actually didn't have too much trouble with ammo just because I think I've just been running around the map so much.
Yeah.
And so when you go to a next tiled map, the monster encounters reset. So you're automatically, once you hit a certain spot, you're gonna have to go through the monsters again. And if you escape, like you press the escape button or whatever, you're gonna go to the beginning of the tile map. So you're gonna have to encounter it. You're
Yep.
gonna have to finish it. So yeah, if you have a gun that uses, let's say, 5 bullets, and you're just spraying so much, yeah, you can run out of ammo easily. Luckily there are melee weapons. I didn't use any of the melee weapons though. I didn't really need to. I
Yeah.
mostly used rifles and grenade launchers. That's pretty much what I had. Other than that, yeah, there's like crafting a little bit here and there. There's upgrading your weapons and armor, which was pretty cool. It's a linear story. You just go through from scene to scene. It goes through the 5 days of like Christmas. Is it?
Yeah, 5 days leading up to Christmas. Where the final mission is on Christmas Day, which is really cool. It's a Christmas game. Because like, how many other games do we have that take place during Christmas?
No, not much.
Not many. Like you got Secret of Mana where you rescue Santa, and other than that, that's pretty much it. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer on the Wii, I guess it's a Christmas game. But you got slim pickings if you want a game that actually takes place during Christmas. Which kind of reminds me of Die Hard in a way, because it's kind of like Die Hard because it's a Christmas game in New York. Kind of like Die Hard, a Christmas movie in LA.
You don't think it's a Christmas game until they are like, oh yeah, it's about to be Christmas, but the city is destroyed.
But you go around the city and there's like Christmas decorations everywhere though, and it's snowing. Like,
yeah, that's true.
You're running around because there's this one scene where you're just running around the streets of New York after I think it was on like day 3 or something at the start of mission. And there's just like Christmas trees and stuff like all up the poles and stuff. Like it's definitely it's definitely the closest thing we kind of have in role playing to a Christmas game, probably. But also besides maybe Cthulhu Saves Christmas, I guess is the other one.
Yeah, that's another one, I guess. Yeah. But anyways, overall, man, I really enjoyed this game. I did not expect it to like it as much as I did. It was pretty accessible once I got the hang of the combat in figuring out where to go. I always wanted to open chests throughout the map and figure out, oh, am I getting the best weapon? Am I getting the best upgrade? Inventory management was a big thing for me as well. I had to figure out when to drop stuff and transfer keys because you get so many keys.
Well, you can open the stuff. Yeah, you need the keys to open the doors and the chests, Garrett.
There's so many doors and chests in this game. Like one time it took over half my inventory. I'm like, what is this garbage? And I cannot drop it until you like go to your transfer trunk or whatever.
I got to the point eventually where like my first time playing where I'm like, I almost don't want to open this chest or loot this thing because I'm scared to get more keys and I don't want more keys in my inventory. I need the inventory room for ammo and other important things.
What I also like about this game is the atmosphere. I think that's the tone of this game it has this like almost alien dark kind of aura around it. It's grim. It has this, I would say, how do I describe it? Like not UFO, but what's that show that's always into sci-fi and does
X-Files?
Like X-Files type of deal. Yeah, like that music, it kind of just like gets into your head.
Speaking of music, real quick, because you touched on it, what do you think about the battle music in this game?
Battle music, man, you have to remind me. I think I liked it, but
oh man, that battle music got like that was one of the most memorable things when I first played it was the battle music. It got so stuck in my head, Garrett. Like I was like all in with that battle
Nice.
music. But I love what you said about the music providing the atmosphere, because you're right. Like that's one of the things I loved about it, where it kind of builds up that horror atmosphere, and for good reason. This is a game about New York City being annihilated.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like they kind of have to set the mood properly, and the music definitely does that. Like even though the visuals are definitely dated because it is a PlayStation 1 game, like
Mhm.
it still builds a fantastic atmosphere even for someone playing it today, just with the
No,
music and even
definitely.
like the visual style alone, even with just the pre-rendered backgrounds that they have.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. I think the music was fantastic. Also, even though the 3D scenes are like, man,
Yeah. I mean,
I
PlayStation 1, those were
I
top tier
understand.
at the time.
I
Like
know.
at the time this game came out, like those were like some of the best cutscenes out there.
I understand. And the Final Fantasy 7 one got me too. I'm like, what is this? And so,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it was pretty cool to see the scenes, then what's happening at each of the moments. I won't spoil the story so much. It was just kept me on my toes. Like
Yeah.
every part, I was like, okay, what is going on with the main character in relationship to the Eve? What's the part with the sister? What's the part with this guy from Japan as well?
Yep.
Um, so yeah, throughout the game, really enjoyed it overall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, I am so happy that you enjoyed this game.
Hmm.
I thought something was up, because you originally told me that we were actually going to we originally were planning on doing this episode next week,
Yeah.
just to give Garrett a little bit of extra time. But then suddenly, like, you just messaged me out of nowhere the other day, and you're like, "I beat it. We got to talk about it." So I'm so glad that you actually had a chance to beat it, because I was like, okay, this was either going to go two ways. Either Garrett really didn't like the game, but just plowed through it and just wants to get it out of the way, or Garrett really, really enjoyed it. So,
Hmm.
dude, I'm so glad that you enjoyed this game. Share the love for Parasite Eve, because again, this is one of those, ideas that I can't believe no one's gone back to. Like
That's the
even,
thing
and it's
too.
not even just Square. Like, why hasn't Capcom
Just
done something like this with Resident
or an
Evil?
indie studio or
Yeah.
like anyone has done anything like this because it's fun combat and it's a great story and like great atmosphere building. Yeah, no, I don't get it. But Sean in the chat asking question for Garrett, what do you think of mitochondria? Are you pro mitochondria? Oh man, oh man. I the lore behind this. I'm gonna try to explain it.
Oh my god. I'm
'Cause,
all right. I couldn't do. That's why I left the. Sean asked the question, why did I leave the mitochondria out of the fun facts? I'm like, you don't need me to try to explain
So, okay,
mitochondria to
I'm
you.
I'm not I'm not an expert in cell biology, but basically what happened is that the mitochondria, the cell, and mitochondria needs oxygen supply to produce energy. You get that from the nucleus. And so Eve's mitochondria, the cultured cells, evolved where they don't need the nucleus and took over the cells and basically have evolved and therefore is the villain. And that's why it can create tons of energy. Therefore, spontaneous combustion happens every time Eve kind of gets close to anyone nearby. Um, I won't go into the story too much. Other than that, it's evolution.
Yeah,
It's mitochondria.
because
That's it.
that's how Eve makes all
Gosh.
the bad guys as well. Where like she'll,
Hmm.
you like evolve like the rats in the very first scene in the
Hmm.
theater, using mitochondria as the catalyst
As
essentially.
I
But
was reading that, I'm like, wait, they're really trying to make this logic work.
yes. That was the logic from the original novel. Like that
That's
was
true.
because
That's
the
true.
original novel is about Eve. Like
Hmm.
her backstory is the first novel, and how like the very first person that Eve possessed. Like that's what the first novel was about. So
Hmm.
then that and then of course that ties into this game, where now we're finally seeing Eve, outside of Japan. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of where they were going with it. But yeah, like that you'll hardly hear the word mitochondria
I so
so
much.
much throughout the game.
I was
It's
actually
also the
pretty surprised that
it
that word just kept going throughout the game.
yeah.
I almost I almost wanted to search it up because I was like, I know what that is, but I don't know. Like, I haven't been in cell biology in forever.
Yeah.
But they kind of explained it in the game. I'm like, oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Exactly. And whereas, of course, a big dum dum like me, Garrett, this is like, Sure. Cells, nucleus, whatever. It's fine. I'm sure
Yeah,
there's
that was
a
interesting.
perfectly logical explanation as to why I'm fighting. Insert spoiler boss here. But here we go. Garrett and I will talk about that after the show. There's like,
Sure.
I actually love the bosses in this game, Garrett, and there's like
Oh, it's great.
one in particular. I'm like, okay. As soon as we went to insert location here that I won't spoil, because that'll give it away right away. I know that this is going to circle around and we're going to have to fight the thing that's here. And then,
Yeah. No,
and
you
then lo
definitely
and
do.
behold, in like a mission on day 4, you circle around and you go to that place and you fight insert boss here. And I'm like,
I
that was like one of the coolest boss fights in this game.
The thing is, I find it really funny that, like, even though these bosses are epic, I'm like, I'm just killing these guys with guns and bullets.
Yeah. Well, bullets just
So,
do the job, Garrett. That's how life works. That's you pulled like grenade launchers for the big bosses, clearly.
I like the jank to it because, her default picture animation is with a pistol, but once you get into combat, it changes the weapon,
Yep.
whatever weapon you have equipped,
Yeah.
and then goes back to the pistol.
Yeah. Well, she,
So,
I mean, I'm sure she just has a mythical backpack that she's just pulling these like grenade launchers out of and stuff like that. Or they fit inside her jacket somewhere. Like
yeah.
she's just walking around. She's like this because like there's like a whole bunch of guns just underneath her jacket. But,
I also do want to mention I did play this on Vita all the way
mhm.
through, and it was kind of difficult to initially play it like this just because how small it is.
Yeah.
I'm on a small screen. It's the aspect ratio is it's more square, right? And so you'll have thick bezels on the sides. I could not make of Aya's face or anyone's face at all
Mhm.
in the game, and that's just because of poor graphics, but also it's a very small screen.
Yeah.
Um, I would recommend if you can try to play this on a PlayStation 3
Yeah.
or either or PlayStation 1,
Yeah. Or
classic go.
well, it plays on every PlayStation 1, 2, and 3. So if you got a PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, or PlayStation 3, you just pop this disc in and you just play. Or of
Yeah.
course your PlayStation 3 it's on the digital store for $5 if you've got a
Yes.
PlayStation 3 lying around. Because I definitely agree like with your assessment. Like I think it is well worth a play. Like as someone who's never played this game before, if you
Mhm,
like turn-based role-playing games and you like horror games, like this game's a no-brainer and
mhm,
it'll be one of the most unique RPG experiences you'll probably ever play because
mhm.
I don't know if we'll ever get another game like this at this point. Like I've given up hope,
That's
Garrett.
true.
Like it's been 25 years later and we haven't gotten anything else like this.
And I will say the 2D art map makes more sense than in Final Fantasy VII. I don't
Yeah.
understand what's going on with Final Fantasy VII 2D art. I think
Yeah.
a trail's a trail, but it's not.
Yeah.
But in Parasite Eve, it's like Central Park. You're going down a trail.
Yeah.
In the hospital, you're going down a hallway. Like it's very clear.
Because don't get me
Um,
wrong, there are some areas where it's like easy to get lost in, but you never really needed like to toggle the visual indicator to show you where the exits are, like you
yeah.
did in Final Fantasy VII, where it's
Oh
like
my gosh.
there's a reason why that's like most people would just leave that on by default to see where you can actually interact with the environment. Whereas
Mhm.
in this game, it's tough, especially if you're playing on Vita. To your point, Garrett, where it's like
Yeah.
it's tougher to see around like certain maps or certain environments where you're supposed to go with the screen that small. So it's definitely like I would recommend for sure playing it on, a TV of some kind, whether it is PlayStation 1,
Mhm.
2, or 3, or braving the emulation waters, which again, it's tough because emulation for this game isn't great. I mean, they cracked the code with the PlayStation 3 version because that's emulated. But
Yeah.
yeah, like I would definitely recommend playing it on PlayStation 1, 2, or 3. If you can somehow find the disc, I mean, this is pretty expensive because this game is not
Mm,
like, it's not one of the most expensive PS1 games, but it's also definitely not in the cheaper side of the equation
mhm.
either. Like, I think this usually goes for about $100 if you want to play it.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow.
The second
I
game's
think
even more expensive, but first game
mhm.
is expensive.
And it's also, not a long game.
Yeah.
I beat it in 10 hours. I'm sure if you want to really like go through it, like it could be less than that if you want to. But then again, I did take my time and it was really like 3 or 4 times. I was like, okay, where am I supposed to go? And normally it was just like I did not find the point in the map to just kind of move forward.
Mhm.
And once I figured that out, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, okay. I don't need to watch any more of this. I actually did. I want to tell you, Ryan, I
Oh,
did. I saw a complete playthrough on the very last bit of the game. I
okay.
kind of wanted to do that, and I'll tell you after the show. But I didn't want to mess with that too much.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally understandable. But yeah, Parasite Eve, very, very fun game. I mean, actually, we kind of touched on a lot of the different points that I had,
Mhm.
which is awesome because I did not expect our conversation to kind of spin off from there, Garrett. So, obviously, after Parasite Eve came out, people, of course, like as I mentioned before, they greenlit the sequel very quickly. So
Mhm.
it's time to talk about Parasite Eve 2, Garrett, because
Okay.
there's a reason why I didn't recommend it to go play this game first, because I know some people like recommend this one, but the main difference with Parasite Eve 2 is that they pretty much went full Resident Evil with this one, where
Oh.
they took away the turn-based element of it and the active time battle, but it still got all the RPG elements from that the first one had, with the
Mhm.
upgrading, with the gear system and everything else that you had in the first game as far as RPG stuff went. You also have some of the powers from the first game that are
Mhm.
back. But it is very traditional tank control, Resident Evil style
I see.
real-time action game,
I see.
with some puzzles. So it is definitely more in that direction. If you like the Resident Evil PS1 games, then you'll be right at home with Parasite Eve 2. But it is definitely like not as good as or unique as the first one.
I see.
And it almost feels a little more generic because of it, where it is like, it's continuing the story of the first one, which is cool if you're a fan of the first game, but it's just not, I don't know, it's not as good as Resident Evil is on the PlayStation 1. And it's not as good as the first game either. So, but it's still
Interesting.
not a bad game. It's still fun, but just not nearly as good. So keeping your expectations in check. And then of course, Garrett, the final game in the series, releasing on the PSP in 2011, the third birthday. This, of course, was a very interesting game because, as I mentioned, it was supposed to be a mobile game before. It's a third-person shooter. Notice I did not mention the words RPG in there.
Third
It's
person
a
shooter.
third-person shooter on the PSP that only has one analog stick. This game
Oh boy.
is very annoying to control. And the story, oh boy, it goes places. It's in like a post-apocalyptic world because I guess like Eve or like Eve is brought back, and the world is kind of destroyed in this one.
Oh no.
And Aya is basically kind of in the wreckage of the world, trying to fight back all these mutated monsters and stuff, but while trying not to become a monster herself. Again, like it's kind of like an interesting way for the story to diverge, but this game kind of killed the series in so many ways. And it also didn't help too because this released 10 years after the second game,
Yeah, such a
and
large gap.
because there wasn't really anything else in that gap, like people just forgot about Parasite Eve. Like there was
Mhm.
like the series didn't continue, or Square Enix didn't do a good enough job of keeping the series in people's minds or memories, because
Mhm.
we did have the manga series based off Parasite Eve come out around the same time as the second game came out, but that was kind of it. Like we didn't really have like that series was basically dead for 10 years. So it was tough because the PSP itself wasn't really like an amazing selling handheld. Like it sold fairly well, but like the game library in particular just didn't really have like a large install
Mhm.
base like you saw on the DS. So just games like this just didn't really sell super well, unfortunately. Which is too bad because that kind of again killed the series, because that we just again have never seen it come back at this point, Garrett. So as you can tell, like you can now kind of understand now why I've been kind of asking, not even necessarily for a remake, as much as I would love like a remake, remaster, or some kind of sequel to Parasite Eve at this point, Garrett. Like
Mhm.
I now you can understand why I've been such a big champion for bringing back just a playable version on modern consoles in the same way that Square Enix has been doing with all their other PlayStation 1 games. Like we've been getting all
Mhm.
those Final Fantasy game remasters, Legend of Mana remaster, but it still hurts me to this day that they haven't done that with Parasite Eve at this point.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I think the like I want something very similar to the Resident Evil 1 HD port or whatever they done with that. Just enhanced, or what they do with, with Metal Gear Solid and,
Mhm.
these kinds of ports where it's like, okay, it's still the game. It's just a little bit more, it just added more modern context. Maybe a map system would be fantastic. Like, I think you really just need a map system and
Mhm.
update your art assets and graphics, and you're pretty much there with
Yeah,
this game.
I
That's
think
that's
so too.
really all you need to make it just like you could just go through it and um, make it an enjoyable experience for everyone. And just go for it. I'm sorry this game is left where it is, because I think this game by itself is a very unique game.
Mhm.
It is definitely a standout of all the other RPGs I've played recently. So thank you for suggesting it,
Oh no,
Ryan.
thank you for
Mhm,
giving it a chance, Garrett, for playing it and for dealing with me blabbing about this game forever and having to
mhm.
be kind of on the other side of the microphone. Because it's one thing if you're a listener and have to hear me always talk about this game. It's another thing if you're Garrett and on the other side of this phone call every week. Just
Yeah,
having
no.
to hear me talk about Parasite Eve all the time. Because
Um, I think the other one more thing I wanted to add on to the first game is
Mhm,
what you mentioned earlier. I love the tuning up your armor
mhm,
and weapons. So basically, there's some stat. So you get armor and weapons throughout the game. You have some stats associated with those weapons and armor, and then they can have perks. Just different kinds of perks, and so you basically get these things called tools, and then you're able to kind of inherit or add bonuses or perks from one weapon or one armor to your current weapon or current armor. And so I thought that was a pretty neat mechanic where I was really beefing up like
yeah.
certain weapons and armor. I got to the point with one weapon that I'm able to do two actions
Mhm.
at one time, and that really changed the game for me. I two actions at, like after you get your gauge full, it's really like a game changer. Made it much easier for me. I'm able to shoot and heal myself at the same time. I think that really got me too in the addictive gameplay loop. Yeah.
Yeah, like I feel like the power progression for how the upgrades works is really, really good. Like I like how like at the beginning you kind of feel like you're not really that powerful, but like towards the end of the game with your upgrades and stuff, like you feel really powerful
Mhm.
towards the end of the game,
You definitely
which
do.
is I think exactly what they want to go with this
And the
game.
bosses correspond to that. Let me tell you. Whew.
Of course, they have to. You have to make because if you again make some of the wrong moves with upgrading, it can really set you back in this game.
Mhm.
Like really, really set you
Yeah,
back big time.
definitely.
Yeah. Good, good. Thank you for bringing that up, Garrett. I appreciate that. I'm gonna bring in Captain Awesome really quick from the chat because
Sounds good.
we got this question. Have either of y'all played Gloomhaven? Any tips you have? I've never played Gloomhaven, so
No, me
I don't have
neither.
either. But I want to, of course, acknowledge Captain Awesome's question for the thank you very much, Captain Awesome, for letting us know. But Garrett, it's time to now get into the listener inquiries about Parasite Eve because these will be interesting. Let's start off with Blaze Knight, who says, first of all, congratulations, Garrett, for beating the game. Second,
Thank you.
have you read the book that Parasite Eve is based off? Looks like it's pretty pricey in English. We talked about that a little bit earlier. I have not read the book because, to your point,
Mm-mm.
Blaze Knight, it is very expensive. Because
Oh, really?
yes, because the
The book
North,
is
because
okay.
you can get the Japanese copy for very cheap, assuming you can read
Mm,
kanji, but the North American translated copy is very expensive. So
why is that? Why, like, they just didn't have enough prints, I
very
guess, of
limited
it.
print run for it. Yeah,
Mm, okay.
because it never got a second issue at all.
I find these kind of things odd to me in terms of just books because it's pretty different than a game. A game is like they're products, so I wouldn't say like from rules of commerce and structurally wise, yeah, I understand why you've run out of prints, but it's literally like text. It's literally knowledge. It's like literally electronic paper. It's not like this huge advanced whatever separate files or a big zip file or whatever. So I just find it interesting that they just didn't think of, okay, here it is. I'm sure it's out floating somewhere
Yeah, I'm pretty
as a
sure it is. I
PDF.
just haven't really
Mhm,
done the deep diving necessary to try and find it out
mhm.
out there in the ether. That's what I'd say.
Internet Archive, they do some shady stuff, but they store
Yeah.
everything
They like
in
to
that.
preserve things on the internet. But
Right
all right,
here in San Francisco,
exactly.
apparently.
Next up, we got Rybo, who says, "Dear Blandino and Buckaroo," I guess those are our names now, Garrett. Would you classify the PlayStation 1 classic Parasite Eve as being very too complicated? Yes, use the words very too complicated, especially
Mhm.
for someone who remembers briefly playing it at launch, but now has trouble going back to PlayStation 1 era games. So here's the thing, Rybo. I actually think this game is less complicated than something like Final Fantasy VII is on PlayStation 1, if I'm
I
being
agree.
honest.
I
Because
agree.
the materia system and having to juggle materia in and out of all your equipment is way more complicated than anything Parasite Eve throws at you. If
That
I'm being honest.
that's very true.
Yeah.
These are very straightforward mechanics, very straightforward concepts, and you're just going through tile to tile. I just get lost sometimes, and I just had a. There's literally a YouTube video of a full
Yeah.
playthrough, and I
But
just kind of jump around different points
true.
of
But in
the video.
mechanics wise, this game mechanically plays like
So
a
easy.
modern indie game, like a
No,
modern indie
no joke.
RPG.
Yeah, because you literally just go around and press a lot
Yeah.
to shoot, and then maybe use a heal or whatever, but that's it.
Yeah, it gets a little more complicated when you got skills and stuff, but like
Yeah,
again, like it's not super
it's
complicated.
basic RPG stuff though. Like
Yeah.
you just have buffs and debuffs, healing. It's all there, kind of.
Mhm.
So yeah, not bad.
Next up, we got Drellesh, who's got not one but two inquiries. So we're going to start with Drellesh's first one. Drellesh says, "Greetings, Garrett. Please explain to us why Parasite Eve is a game paved with good intentions, but fails to combine RPG elements and survival horror successfully. Rather, it is a solid RPG with questionable design choices and missing overworld maps. A perfect Sean Capri game, some would say. However, in your opinion, does it succeed in being scary? Is it truly a survival horror game? Your thoughts on the matter?"
That's a lot. Okay, so that's interesting that he thinks it fails to combine RPG elements and survival horror. I think again, it's not to me, this was not like a survival horror
Yeah.
game as
Or it's not
much.
really trying to be a traditional survival horror game. Like it's
Exactly.
not trying to be Resident Evil, but it has elements of survival horror that make it feel like a survival horror game and an
Mhm.
RPG game combined together, but it's not trying to necessarily emulate the Resident Evil 2 thing. That was Parasite Eve 2, ladies and gentlemen. Parasite Eve
Yeah,
2 was very much trying to do the survival horror RPG thing in
got
more
it.
ways than this game was. But I
Yeah,
do feel like this game successfully blends those two genres in a neat and interesting way.
me too. Yeah, no, I really do because you just really go from it's pretty straightforward. You go era to era. You know when you're getting into a battle,
Mhm.
and you're going through the combat, and I think it's addictive combat. It's very, as you said, it's very close to Transistor. As far as gameplay, you stop, you do an action, and it's like that's how it's supposed to be. Like to me in my head, this is why I struggle with active. Was it the active time battles in
Yeah.
Final Fantasy and many other RPGs? I don't know why it doesn't get into my head. I just don't get it. Like I'm not fast enough or
Mhm.
something like that. Whereas this one, you really can take your time. You can,
Yeah, like it's paced very well
yeah.
as far as the active time battle is concerned. Definitely
Hmm.
definitely see your point of view on that one.
Hmm.
But as far as it being scary, we talked about that a little bit earlier. Like it's very like it does the atmosphere thing very well, like with its music and everything else. Like it's not
Yeah.
scary per se, but it is like very tense, and you can definitely
Hmm.
feel like the horror kind of atmosphere built
Oh,
in this game.
definitely. Yeah. No, it makes you feel like this would be more of a gross horror, uncomfortable movie. It's
Yeah.
one of those like, okay, it's like, man, what's a good movie? like Shutter Island is like I think another kind of in the same vein. It's like horror theme. It's not there to jump scare you though. You're not turning off the lights and then boo, like a big werewolf or ghost like comes at you or runs after you or something like that. No,
Yeah.
it's more like, okay, the world's gonna end or this city is gonna end type of thing, and there's a lot of horror monsters that are gonna come after you,
Yeah.
basically.
Makes
So
sense.
I like it.
Yeah. I like it. Next up, we got Awesome Dave. Oh my God, this question kills me. With Parasite Eve coming out the year before Final Fantasy VIII, do you think Parasite Eve was not as successful as everyone was waiting for the banger that would be Final Fantasy VIII? I think that played a little bit into it, but no, I don't think it had anything to do with it. In fact, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the first game was actually very successful in Japan, especially, where like there's a reason why the sequel came out 2 years later very quickly. Like they're like, we got to get this thing out the door because people are enjoying this first game.
I really wonder why they really had to change it. I think they just saw Resident Evil's success and was like,
Yeah,
we gotta mimic that. And
I think
go through
100% that's what happened. Like
Mhm.
the design, like the new team that was brought in for the second one, really, because
The
they
new
changed a
team as
lot of
well.
the team between games,
Yeah, I see.
which I think like they were inspired by Resident Evil more so, and they're just like, we got to make it like that as much as that as possible. And I think it was the detriment to the game. It's still not a bad game, but it's just not as good as what it was aspiring to be, I think.
Okay.
And then Drellesh with the follow-up question for the show: why is Final Fantasy VIII to be considered by some as the worst in the series? Also, why does it have such a dedicated fan base like Awesome Dave, who appreciates the characters' emotional depth and ambitious storytelling? Is it just an unconventional game that everyone needs to have experience? So, Garrett, obviously, I don't think you have a lot to say about Final Fantasy VIII in particular.
Nope.
Whereas I've played Final Fantasy VIII, and honestly, it's a very divisive game. I think that's the problem, Charles. Where I think like the people who really like Final Fantasy VIII really like Final Fantasy VIII, and the people who don't like Final Fantasy VIII are just like, no, thank you, keep that away from me. Like, so because to Drellish's point in the question, there are people who think it's the worst Final Fantasy game, which I don't think it is. I think it's, there's a certain Final Fantasy game that you and I both agree is worse than Final Fantasy VIII, Garrett.
Oh yeah, no, we completely agree. It's like unanimous.
Yeah,
it's actually unanimous across all carpool gaming. Sean agreed to what the worst Final Fantasy game is. It's yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's tough to actually call 10 the worst Final Fantasy game. There's because there are some bad Final Fantasy games, but
I'm
it's
running
like,
with the joke, man.
I know
all the way to the end.
But yeah, with 8, again, it's got some good elements. I'm just not super into it either. Like, I think it's fine, but it's a very difficult. It's the main reason why, we've got, Awesome Dave, who's, one of the Final Fantasy VIII fandom, who's very excited about it. But, you don't see, like, not everyone's just like that. It's a very unique game too, where your character has a job and they get paid rather than, earning money through, things, and you've got to like suck the magic out of the monsters in order to use it. It's got ideas, man. It goes places. It's weird.
That just sounds complicated.
You're spending like half the game in the past with these other characters that aren't in your party, and it's just like, it's weird, man. It's a weird game. But
interesting. I have a fun fact for you, actually.
Ooh, I like fun facts.
During my playthrough, I got to the part of end of disc 1 on Parasite Eve, and it told me to change the disc. And I was like, how the heck do I do that on my Vita?
You gotta go in the menu, man. Just change those things.
I had to look it up. I was like, how do I do this? And then it's just a virtual menu, and I just switch the disc right then and there. But it's just like that's an out-of-body experience right there of like going through a game, being really into it, and it just literally says change disc to 2 or change to disc 2. I'm like, what is this?
You just
so
wait till like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth comes out next year, Garrett.
That's
that
true.
Game is bringing it back. It's on 2 discs.
On the PS, that's unbelievable.
A
on
PS5
the PS5
game on 2 discs. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
In
It's
fact,
that
actually, I
big.
think the physical version of 16 was also on 2 discs, I think.
It is, but I think for those, were they like you download one disc and you just keep one disc in?
Yeah, like you have to keep one disc in for, the thing, but I
Just
think you have
check
to. I think you
the
install
code.
from both discs. I think that's how that
Yeah.
works.
Yeah, you just install. Yeah, that's how it's been like since like probably the 360 PS3 days. But man, let me tell you, like a PS1 game is like, all right, your save is like in suspense right now. Try to
Yeah.
figure out how to change to disc 2. I'm like, am I not gonna be able to finish this? That's what I was really scared of.
I honestly can't wait then, Garrett, until I find another PS1 RPG for you to play. That's going to be like 4 or 5 discs, and
Oh my gosh.
you're gonna have to use that function a lot, just hoping that your save kind of carries over. But it's also, a fun fact about collecting old games that
Mhm.
you learn over the years is that generally disc 2 is usually the disc that barely anyone touches, which is why like it's
That's
always the
true.
clean disc. Like if there's any ever problems with your game, it's always on disc 1 and not disc 2 because
Yeah.
of the fact that barely anyone actually uses disc 2.
Well, the majority of the game is on disc 1.
Right.
Like disc 2 was kind of like the last 2
Right.
hours of it.
Yeah.
Something like
Well,
that.
literally in Final Fantasy 7, Garrett, with disc 3, it's literally just the final dungeon. That's it.
They're like, guys, we can't fit it all into 2 disc. I wonder what the developers thought of it. Was it relatively cheap to just make another disc and have it out, or was it like a major decision in their development?
I think it might have been a major decision at the time because with each one of those, like the cost of making an additional disc is very cheap, but when you multiply that by the millions of copies they have to
That's
manufacture,
true.
like that actually probably adds up. Plus, they have to put them in these special cases, Garrett, because they're like thicker than normal cases.
That's true.
And because then they, you have the compartment for 4 games for
Hmm.
for 4 discs in there. But there was never like a PS1 game that was bigger than 4 discs. 4 discs is the
I see.
biggest one.
I see.
But that includes games like Final Fantasy 8 or Legend of Dragoon or Final Fantasy 9 is like that too.
Yeah, those are the big ones I've heard.
Yeah. In fact, that
cool.
used to be a selling feature on the back of the box. Like sometimes they'd be like an epic RPG across 4 discs of action. Like
It kind of felt like that when they were advertising Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. They're like multi-disc. I'm like, we're bringing this back. Okay.
Yeah. On 2.
They're
That's how you
pleasing
know
the
it's a big game.
fans.
It's on
Yeah.
2
Well,
discs.
sure.
Yeah.
Ooh.
All right, Garrett, it's decision time because we're about to end the show, but there's one thing we need to do before we've ended the show.
Yes.
Because Garrett, your side quest RPG, like your backlog RPG adventure has come to an end.
Yes.
It's time for you to get a new game, Garrett.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I have a question for you, Garrett, and I'm not sure because I'm trying to think about how many times we've discussed this series. I think we may have talked about it once briefly on a show before.
Okay.
But I don't know if you played it because I kind of want to give you, now that I've given you a couple classic games, and before I recommend like another really old game to you next, because spoiler alert, Garrett, after this game you're about to play, your next game will be on Sega CD. You will be playing a Sega CD RPG after this one I'm about to recommend to you. But I want to give you like a game that's in the modern era that I think you might have not played. So
sounds good.
I have a question for you guys. How do you feel about the the Valkyria Chronicles series? How many of those have you played?
Oh, I've played like a few hours of the first one, or the first one, and a few hours of the fourth one. Those are the 2 I've put some hours in, but I didn't beat them.
Okay. But did you put them down because you didn't like them, or you just ran out of time?
I just had
or
other games to do. Yeah.
Well, guess what, Garrett? The
dang.
time is now. You're going to go back to Valkyria Chronicles, the first one.
The first one.
And you're going to play it, and we're going to talk about it.
Sounds good.
Because I know you have it, which is great. Because then I don't have to feel bad about recommending a game for you to go buy.
Hold on. There we go.
Well, look at that.
There we go. Yeah. Valkyria Chronicles Remastered on the PS4.
Perfect.
One of my first steelbooks, actually, for PS4.
Ooh,
so,
that's fancy. I don't even
really
have
like
that.
this one. Yeah. So there you go.
No, Valkyria Chronicles has been a series that's on my mind lately because I'm like, that's another series that I would really love to see come back. But also, it's just like that's another series that I'd love for us to have a discussion about, and I'd love for you to play through one of them. And Valkyria Chronicles was like a really good game on the PS3, but then of course got an awesome remaster. So I'm excited for you to give it another go, Garrett.
I'll definitely play it. You know where? On Steam Deck, because I have it on Steam. Let's do it.
Because I don't think it's like, I think it's also too long to beat either.
It's not long. I would say like it's 20 hours or less, I would say, right?
Yeah. Well, how long to beat says 30 hours, but whatever. Yeah, you can probably beat it faster than that. Because when I beat it, I also remember it being less than 30 hours. But
yeah.
Either way, maybe it's a long time before we get to those races, but I'm soon, Garrett. Your time is approaching. Sega CD games are almost in your future, but I couldn't do that to you with kind of 3 super old games in a row. I wanted to give you a little bit of old games. But
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's episode of the RPG Cave. But before we go, Garrett, plugs go.
You can follow me at Twitter/X at Blind Explosion. And you can also find me on the Discord. I am very active on the RPG Cave. I see you guys just go back and forth on this channel.
The conversations that were happening just tonight, Garrett, before the show started, were palpable. Not even just about this, where there's like a whole side conversation going on about the Legend of Natuya, Dragon Quest Monsters demo, all kinds of crazy stuff. RPG Cave Discord is popping off. Let me tell you.
It really is. And I think Drellesh put in like a Chat GPT story. I swear there's like 20 paragraphs of a story.
I was tempted to read it on the show, but I'm like, that's way too long.
That's 30 paragraphs of I just give me the too long didn't read. Oh my gosh.
It's the story about Awesome Dave playing Final Fantasy VIII. That's it. That's
I love it.
That's the cliff notes. And Shaw and Capri already writing there. Kind of want to see some Parasite Eve's Gilmont art. Good God.
I don't know how they got that.
I don't know either, man. As for me, you can find me on the old X at Ryan Turford. And you also find us on X at Carpool Gaming right here, youtube.com/Carpool Gaming. And of course, podcast services around the globe. So for Garrett Blaine, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been episode 107 of the RPG Cave. God, we got to level up our characters pretty soon, Garrett.
We do, man.
I'm casting magic missiles and nothing is happening anymore. These monsters are not going down anymore. We got to level up our characters.
We're out. Bye-bye.